Hey, what's up, Acolytes of the Force? Welcome back to the archives. I just finished the Acolyte episode 3 entitled Destiny, and I'm joined here again with the Archivist.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
And we're going to be sharing our thoughts on the Acolyte. There will be full spoilers in this video, in this discussion. So if you have not seen it, just go watch it. We're going to dive into all the lore, dived into a lot of the stuff that unfortunately I didn't like in this episode, and then some of the stuff that I did like in this episode. But you've been warned. Please go check it out before we jump in.
Right.
All right. Episode 3 of The Acolyte entitled Destiny. I just want to start off by saying that I thought the first 2 episodes of The Acolyte were pretty solid. All things considered, I think the budget is on screen, which is exactly what you want to see. A lot of the people criticized Obi-Wan for not looking as good as it could have. And, you know, with double the budget of The Acolyte, they came in swinging. I thought the first 2 episodes looked great. I thought that it set up a fairly interesting plot. By no means is it the greatest Star Wars I've ever seen, but also by no means would I consider it bad or even poor. I'd even go as far as to say the first 2 episodes are above average for what we've seen so far in Star Wars concerning Disney Plus. The episode that we just watched, that just came out, Destiny, I did not like at all. It was a full backstory episode. I thought the child actors were not great. Obviously, they're child actors, and Star Wars fans in particular have this awful reputation of just being horrible to actors, so we don't want to have any of that discourse here. But at the same time, you know, we have to be honest. It's our job to, you know, review and analyze a lot of the lore that Star Wars gives us. And if we're not honest with our opinions, what do we have? I didn't like the child actors at all. The episode, I thought, would have been so much better if we had gotten flashbacks just to like the first 2 episodes, how they handled the story there, where they show us big moments of the past of Osha and May, but a whole episode hinging on these 2 actors' performances, and then not to mention a backstory that is going to be very controversial, a lot of new controversial lore. I just thought very little of it landed, especially for me. What do you think?
You know, with it being framed as a mystery show, I knew the backstory reveal was going to come. I had thought that as more things got uncovered, they would sprinkle in flashbacks to confirm the answers as to what's like really going on. And I did kind of expect like that there might be a full flashback centered episode. I just didn't think it was going to be this soon. Like, I had assumed that the Acolyte is going to be more mystery focused as well as action based. But they've chosen to kind of put all the cards on the table within the first 3 episodes. So I'm really wondering, like, where is it going to go from here?
One of my issues, and I don't know if you think similarly, but the episode didn't give us a whole lot of information that we didn't already know from the previous 2. It even follows Osha from the point where the burning of the village or the coven occurs, and it's framed with everything that we were already told in the first 2 episodes. And when you're making these shows and they're only 8 episodes long and each episode is only 30 minutes, I think that the time could be better served, you know, showing us other things. I know a lot of people talk about show don't tell, but I think that it could be better illustrated and flow a little bit better if perhaps we were seeing some of that when characters in our present day are speaking about, you know, May's betrayal and that point of view. I found seeing that to be a little bit unnecessary, especially when seasons are so short.
See, I had that problem with the Book of Boba Fett, is, you know, when we'd have those whole episodes where he's in the Bacta tank taking a bath, and we'd flash back to what he was doing with Tusken Raiders on Tatooine. Like, I don't care. I just don't care. I thought the, you know, I know this is off topic talking about Boba Fett, but the feelings are the same with the Acolyte, is that when we flash back to Kamino and we saw young Boba Fett's perspective, I enjoyed that and wanted more of that, but we didn't get any more of that. So with this episode, we got a lot of like the Jedi being on Brendok, on their home planet, but we didn't really get, in my opinion, the impact that the Jedi had on May in particular, I don't think it supports her revenge quest very well, because they were just kind of there.
Yeah, and we don't have a lot of the information. I'm still waiting for the show to develop and
Yeah.
cook, finish cooking the meal per se. But you made a good point about sort of the episodic nature and these episodes that aren't fueling this larger narrative at the pace that we would like. In a show like The Mandalorian, I feel like that works very well. Where you sort of have this bounty hunter going off on these one-off adventures. But when you have these big overarching narratives with shows like Obi-Wan and with The Acolyte, and to, I think, a little bit of a lesser extent with the Book of Boba Fett, like you mentioned, these shows need to be leaned out if they're going to be this short, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. There are episodes of the Obi-Wan show that just go nowhere. And not to say that this show is as guilty of that pitfall as Obi-Wan was, but it is still a pitfall that I'm seeing time and time again. The shows, for me at least, they're just not long enough. And it's okay if they're short, but if they're short, they need to be more focused.
I would have to agree. I think that, this is a problem that has unfortunately followed a lot of these Disney Plus. I say a lot, almost every single one of these Disney Plus miniseries. What good there is stifled by the unnecessary and unwarranted filler. Like, in a miniseries, there should be absolutely zero filler, no fat whatsoever.
Yeah, and with Obi-Wan, we obviously have the reason for that being it was initially developed as a full-length film, and then a trilogy, and then a show, so they have to take that script and tweak it. But The Acolyte, as far as we know right now, doesn't really have that excuse. That's not applicable. But moving on, let's dial in on The Acolyte itself, mm-hmm. and sort of put aside all the other Disney Plus miniseries and talk about what specifically in this episode that I didn't like. Anyone that knows the channel and follows the channel knows that the most important thing for me as a Star Wars fan is interesting lore and dedication to quality and compelling storytelling. And lore and storytelling, they obviously go hand in hand. I like that they're dipping their toe into the EU concept-wise, explaining other perceptions, viewpoints, and religions revolving around the Force. That's all interesting, but you have to do something new with it. Mm-hmm. Like you wrote in the text that we were having during the episode, a lot of these people are going to be calling this Coven of Witches Diet Night Sisters. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that's appropriate. With these one-off 30 to 40-minute episodes, I can't really feel too connected with the plight of these witches. I think that they're interesting on the surface, but if these are characters that are just introduced to further the story of May and Osha, it doesn't give me time to feel attached to them. It doesn't give me time to explore, how do they perceive the Force? Obviously, they have darker aspects, but I think that is so much more interesting than in this way hurrying the story along just to get to information that we already know. And that was my one of the big problems I have with this episode.
I'm not upset that there is a new order, because Legends, we talk about this all the time, is that there are like a lot of dark side cults dotted around the galaxy. Like, I'm currently keeping a running list of dark side and light side Force organizations, and this is just kind of another one of those to add to the already very long list of dark side cults. I guess what I do have a problem with is exactly what you said about the fact that they're not different enough from the Night Sisters. And Disney canon right now has really focused on the Night Sisters. They seem to have like this big obsession with them, which, I mean, I get it. They're cool, I guess. But they're like, we want to do Night Sisters, but with blackjack and hookers, like, I don't know.
Yeah. I do want to praise the Acolyte for doing something different in some ways, mm-hmm. though, and being brave. The story that they're telling is likely one that they knew that the fans wouldn't be all in all the way, especially developing what I assume to be some sort of dyad between May and Osha. It's really hitting us over the head in this episode. Yeah. It's even a part of the soundtrack, the music at one point, which I thought was kind of funny. But I do like that they are committing to their story and they don't really mind if a lot of fans are put off by that initially, as long as they bring it home. If they're just doing that to antagonize fans and to bring something different, that's just horrible business at that point. But if they can deliver on what they're giving us with this aspect of the Force of Osha and May being another virginal birth with Anakin, but maybe take it a different way. Maybe this one doesn't have so much to do with prophecy. But if they're doing something, which I hope they're not, but that I suspect that they might, if they're trying to elevate these two new characters to the importance of an Anakin with another virginal birth, that's a problem. I feel like Anakin's legacy is already a little bit difficult to handle, especially bringing Palpatine back in canon and Legends. That's not a Disney problem, by the way. That's a Star Wars storytelling problem. But it's just hard for me to go from a show like Ahsoka, who had the importance of Anakin really built up, and he was integral not only to the plot of that, but to the plot of all of Star Wars. It's his story, large portions of it, and then have it cheapened, in my opinion, like it can be done again. Anakin's not the first Force-based virginal birth. That feels a little cheap to me, and it's something that I don't like at all.
You know, I actually had several thoughts whenever I was like writing this down. Whenever she at first said that there was no father, I assumed that it was because they were a matriarchal society and they were simply denying a father, like in the place of their lives, rather than saying that it was like
the Night Sisters.
Yeah, exactly. But whenever, the two mothers had that argument, I realized that they together created the children. And so I actually wrote down a couple of like notes and some ideas that I might have had, which was, the twins, they're created by magic. And, we know that both the Night Sisters and the Sith could use magic to mutate life. That was the entire crux of the Second Great Schism, is that Ajunta Pall was mutating life. And that was like the biggest no-no that caused the Sith Order to be created in the first place. And we do know that Plagueis could create life, and he was supposedly the first one to be able to do it. And I'm thinking that maybe they discovered the secret to create life through magic using ancient knowledge that was specific to their order. And I think and the reason why I'm actually not worried about it and don't think it's another Anakin situation is because of May. And hear me out on this, right? I think that whatever ritual that created them, it was imperfect and it went wrong somehow. The twins themselves are imperfect. Like, May is clearly screwed up, like a complete psychopath. And I'm thinking that when the Force or the magic was used to create the twins, something weird happened, and all of the light inclinations went into Osha, and all the dark inclinations went into May.
Interesting.
In order to balance the ritual.
Now, what I would love, if that theory is true, what I would love is if they can bring this around to the Sith. The Acolyte right now is really hard to judge, as is every episodic show, because you're not getting to judge the final product all at once. You're having to judge it 30 minutes at a time. So if what you're saying is true, I am all for that, and I think that that makes it far more interesting in the lore. But if that doesn't pan out, we can't really judge this on the hypothetical that they take it the most interesting story way. We have to judge what we get. Yeah. And if later episodes do go the more interesting way, that's prop to them and props to this setup. But to set that up, it felt a little bit flimsy. I would have loved more connections to the Sith. I would have loved, perhaps Plagueis or a Darksider in the background somewhere pulling strings. And maybe there is, maybe this Sith is in the background looking at May. And as the Jedi are, assessing the talents in Osha, maybe the Sith too are assessing the talents in May and looking for apprentices to potentially train. And if the Acolyte is about life and using the Force to create life and how that can go wrong and how that's not the correct path, I think that could be really interesting if they introduce Plagueis and have him be a major player. But my one thing to that is the episode doesn't illustrate well enough that Osha and May being made that the way that they were was a mistake. And I think that there would have been hints if that's the actuality and the truth of it. The witches, to me, were portrayed as peaceful, a little bit benevolent, and the fact that they would
if not a bit
hinge
sneaky.
this whole thing on the hitches, a little sneaky, but not evil. And the fact that the Acolyte show could revolve around that massive mistake, I don't think was set up very well, if that's the truth, if you get what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I guess I'm just choosing to look at it more optimistically. My whole thing is...
Right, and that's good.
Yeah, my whole thing is that I think there would literally be nothing better than if this whole story were to be revealed to be like a Cold War between the Jedi and Sith using these twins as the conduits of that. I think that would be really, really cool. But, I hate to be super pessimistic, but we're 3 episodes into the Acolyte, and we have gotten like a grossly little amount of Sith content.
Yeah. You and I, we've talked about this before off recording, but we love the Sith. It is without a doubt my favorite aspect of all of Star Wars is Sith lore, the Order's history, the archaic abilities that they have created. But the Acolyte so far is not struggling in concept. The concept is great. The witches even had a line where they were forced into hiding because they use what some consider to be the dark side, and they were hunted. And I had the thought in the back of my head, where is that episode of the Acolyte? That sounds way more interesting than what I'm getting right now.
Yeah.
Having the Jedi and other Force-based orders hunt down this group that isn't trusted completely and has to go into hiding. I think that's a way more compelling story than what we got in this episode.
I think we
and just like the whole idea of the Acolyte, the Sith are in hiding. This is their rise to power. In concept, that's phenomenal, but in execution, how much Sith have we gotten? Like a few throwaway lines? That's disappointing. 3 episodes in, as you put it.
Yeah, the problem I'm noticing is we keep getting lip service to things that are more interesting than what's happening on screen.
Yeah. You
want to talk about show don't tell?
No, I agree completely. No kidding. No kidding.
On a more
another thing I wrote down is the Jedi destroy what they believe is the dark side. They fear the Sith's return above all else. And if it does end up that the Jedi are the ones that had a part in the death of these Night Sisters, that's compelling. I don't want this video to turn into we hate every aspect about what the Acolyte is building up to. And I don't want to speak for you, but personally for me, I don't hate everything. I think the idea of the Jedi taking kids at a young age and the Jedi being viewed as the oppressors to some is extremely interesting. Unfortunately, that's not where the attention has been put. It's like you said, the whole show don't tell. These are throwaway lines. They're little morsels. They're not the meal, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not trying to be super negative, of course. In fact, I'm looking for these positives because I think that I have this feeling based on just like what we've seen in the trailers. I keep having this feeling that something really, really cool is coming, but the build up to it just hasn't been done well. And I'm worried that like people might drop off before like the real payoff gets here. Because I sense a payoff coming, but we're just not being led up to it the proper way.
I agree too. I don't want to by any means say that I expect this show to be a complete dumpster fire like a lot of people are hoping that it will be. I don't get that impression either. I do get the impression that there is a payoff waiting, But, again, like we said earlier, we can't judge the whole thing because it's not all out yet. So we have to judge it episode by episode. I do want to say I like what they're setting up with the hero creating the villain. I think those stories are always very interesting. And the Jedi's fear being responsible for the Sith being able to return later down the line and creating their own dark side enemies in May. I just love that in stories in general, and I hope that is what they're establishing. I hope the Jedi have a bigger hand in this massacre than from what we've seen. And obviously with Master Torben in the last episode, who's a Padawan in this episode, and I thought played very well by the actor who's in Game of Thrones, is interesting setup for his guilt, and the interesting setup with Kelnaka and how Master Torben becomes injured and why he takes upon himself the Barash vow. These are all interesting things that I was expecting to get in this episode, and it just never happened. But like you said, they could be paid off later down the line with more quality, but with this one, it just wasn't.
I think there is definitely more that happened that we're not seeing, because we only saw things from the girl's perspective and not what the Jedi were doing. And how the fire even spread that fast. I think the Jedi clearly thought that the witches were a threat, even if they didn't, admit it. I think just like their body language and how they were interacting with the witches kind of showed that the Jedi weren't 100% with them. But in my opinion, right now, I kind of want to talk about Master Soul for a minute, because I kind of hope he stays as squeaky clean as he's made out to be. I really like him.
I really like him too. He is the highlight of the show so far, and he's great in the last 2 episodes as well. Apparently, the actor who plays him had to learn English for this part, and he took a lot of inspiration from Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn, and I think that comes through. He's very compassionate, and the performance is so good thus far. He's almost like an old Ben to a young Luke. He's got that hope in his eye and the excitement to train another Jedi and the good that they can offer the galaxy. Master Soul is compelling and just compassionate. He reminds me a lot of an older Obi-Wan. And I just want to say that that's an aspect of the show that I love. I wouldn't even say that I like it, but I love it right now. Unfortunately, his screen time in this episode is probably 3 minutes in total, but nonetheless, still loving Master Soul, like you put it.
Oh, yeah. I think he's interesting. He represents a side of the Jedi Order that we know exists, that we just don't see, mostly because the Jedi Order itself suppresses this side, which are Jedi that are more in touch with their emotions. Not in the sense where they're giving into them all the time or anything like that, but Master Soul, as you put it, is leaning really hard into that compassion side. Like, we actually see him cry when he's with May because he feels her pain. And you see that he genuinely cares about her, like genuinely, both when she's an adult and when she's a child. I just think and what's interesting else is that he doesn't let his emotions rule him, because we see he's not in exile in the future. He's still trying to be hopeful. And he's, when he heard that May, or not May, I said May earlier, I meant Osha, sorry. When Osha was involved in a supposed murder plot, he was the first one to jump to her defense and try to find her immediately. I just think
and even be patient with May when the two of them fight in episode 2. He's very patient with her. And I like that this episode, I didn't like a lot of the flashbacks, but the stuff between Osha and Master Soul makes a lot of sense, and that trust that they have with one another. A lot of people were comparing, obviously, the relationship between Anakin and Ahsoka, because they were both on the run at one point, Osha and Ahsoka, and both their Jedi Masters stood up for them in that moment. And I really like their relationship a lot and where it's developing. There are good things in the show.
Yeah.
But there are also a lot of bad things in the show. So
yeah, it's one of those unfortunate things where, like you said, there's a lot of good things, but unfortunately this show, this specific episode, spotlighted a lot of the bad. But talking about, what we did see, what do you think about the way the witches use the Force? Like, what do you think about the thread?
Kind of boring, a little bit uninventive. The way the Night Sisters use the Force is so interesting, but the way the magic, the way it even looks different, and I guess it looks sort of different here, but not quite.
They made it a blue puff of mist.
Blue puff of mist. I'm thinking about like the whole Force push scene too.
Yeah,
like there are so much more creative and inventive ways to use the Force and trials that they could just rip from Legends.
Yeah.
But they're just like, how well can you stand up against this Force push? And I look at that and I'm just kind of bored,
Yeah, you're not wrong about that.
I do think it's interesting, the ritual that they perform. Sorry to cut you off. That they give May a whole lot more of their magical energies, and that process, that initiation, is interrupted by the Jedi. I thought that was interesting. I hope that leads to some cool Force abilities later on. I'm thinking that it will, and that if May can sort of turn to the dark side fully and use what her mothers in the Witch Coven taught her for more destructive dark side ways, I think that could be interesting. But again, that's just a hypothetical. All I can go off of is this episode. The blue mist was lame. The Force push was lame. The witches, pretty lame.
I also, to kind of end the lame train for a minute, I was also not really impressed by their actual home planet. Brendok was pretty lackluster. I think there could have been more done to make it look like an alien world than just like a big forest with a single glowing tree.
Right. I mean, they've been on the run, they've been saying, for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's an Outer Rim world. Obviously, the Jedi haven't explored it. But, I mean, I guess I didn't put much thought into the planet. Star Wars recently especially has either been desert, forest, or ice world. So
yeah, I guess
that's another unfortunate thing.
It is a little unfortunate. I think you go to a lot of the comics, and of course I know it's a lot easier to draw a picture of a planetary terrain than to fully render it in CGI in a world that actors have to interact with. Like, yeah, I understand that, but you have planets that have like pink grass and floating mountains and stuff out there, and even in like older Star Wars, we could tell the difference between Endor and Kashyyyk just by looking at the trees. But right. Like you say, it's kind of hard to find a variety in a lot of modern planet designs.
Yeah, I do want to say, though, that the effects continued to be quality for this episode.
Yeah, that's true.
There's not as many big set pieces, but the effects, they still look great. And I'm still hoping for some really cool lightsaber duels down the line. I feel bad because this review and this discussion is sort of more half about the hypothetical of the future. But I think that that's just an example of the pitfall that was this episode of The Acolyte. I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up my thoughts. You can clearly tell I did not like this episode. A lot of the lore that they're building, unless they do some really heavy lifting and some really big connections with the Sith, I also don't love that as well. I don't want Anakin's story to be cheapened. I love that character, and I want him to maintain his spot as the pinnacle Star Wars character and have his story be intact and unique and important. And that's not to say I don't want characters from the past and the future to be important as well, but I want them to find different ways to make those characters important. Revan isn't just a random character pulling out. He's important because of his unique relationship and study of the light and dark side of the Force. And how he's able to marry aspects of the Jedi and Sith and become extremely powerful and enlightened. Revan isn't cool because he's another virginal birth. He's cool because he took an aspect of the world and, expanded upon that. It's not a retread. It's not a, he's not important because he's another chosen one. He's important because he's Revan. Anakin is important because he's Anakin. And I just hope that these characters of May and Osha can break free and tread their own course in Star Wars, that we can look back and say, these characters are awesome, their origin's compelling, not because it's connected or a duplicate of something we've seen before, but because they're interesting and compelling on their own.
I agree. I think what probably could have made this episode a bit stronger, and probably would have been a better way to introduce us to the mystery and the story of these twins, is if instead of doing a 2-episode release, if they had extended the first episode by chopping this one up like a sushi roll and just kind of dropping chunks of it in the middle of the first episode as flashbacks. Mm-hmm. And then we'd reach our full conclusion, get all this backstory information out of the way by the end of episode 1, and then launching straight into May's journey, instead of kicking us off in the beginning with a pretty good start, nicely paced, and then slowing everything down to a first gear crawl for 1 episode, because I think it kills the momentum of the series. Having said that, I do know that the show is promising more action towards the later part of the episodes, and I think as the characters are going to start narrowing their focus on each other and like coming into more contact, we're going to be getting more of that action. Again, I think lightsaber duels are definitely going to be there. Don't think we have to worry about that. I know we still have the reveal of the Master coming that we've seen from the trailers. So definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. And I've by no means given up on the Acolyte. No. I thought it had a really strong start with the first 2 episodes. And from everything that they've promised to be showing us, I think that that's going to build up to something that could potentially be one of the better entries in this Disney Plus Star Wars era. With that said, if you guys are disappointed with how much Sith lore you got in episode 3 of The Acolyte, tomorrow we're releasing a video all about Palpatine detailing exactly the criteria for the perfect Sith apprentice. So if this episode didn't quite tickle your Sith enough, hopefully tomorrow our video will. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for visiting the channel and the archives today. As always, our opinions are our own. We don't expect you guys to hold the same, or if you do, we'd love to hear them. And if you don't, we'd also love to hear them. I hope you guys enjoyed The Acolyte more than we did. And if you didn't, I hope you enjoyed our discussion. Thank you again to the Archivist for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And may the Force be with everybody. I hope you guys have a wonderful night and a phenomenal start to your week.
See you next time.
Catch you guys soon. Bye.